Every day, more and more veterans come forward publicly to speak out about their exposures during service. And we continue to hear about new toxins such as PFAS used in military firefighting foam. Despite countless studies, VA still says it requires more credible research before it will establish a connection between certain exposures during service and subsequent health conditions. As the evidence sometimes is only anecdotal, suggesting illness and disease in veteran populations continues to pile up, the committee must examine how to best provide care and services to these veterans. It is abundantly clear that we must act now. And that is why I'm so glad that we are here to discuss this legislation today. My colleagues impressively have introduced 15 bills that cover the gamut of issues in the toxic exposure space, from the need to address airborne hazards and burn pits and additional presumptive disabilities for Vietnam veterans, to looking at ways to revamp and improve VA's research and decision-making process as it relates to toxic exposure claims. The burden of proof shouldn't be on our veterans, and there's no reason why they and their survivors should have to fight VA for the care and benefits they've earned. And while I appreciate bills that address individual exposures, we cannot continue to tackle this topic one disability at a time and one exposure group at a time. We need to reform and overhaul the process within VA so that the agency can provide support to veterans without the need for continued congressional intervention. Today's hearing serves as an opportunity to continue the conversation with VA and other interested stakeholders to ensure that we consider all views as we craft comprehensive legislation. It is critical that we hear from experts and veteran stakeholders as we figure out the best way to care for all veterans who have been exposed to toxic substances, regardless of where or when they've served. Now, I want to thank all the stakeholders that have actively assisted in the development of the bills on the agenda. It is through this collaboration that we can ensure the laws we enact provide veterans and survivors with adequate access to benefits. Addressing toxic exposures remains one of my top priorities for the committee this year, and I'm committed to advancing comprehensive legislation to address it this Congress. And with that in mind, I know I cannot accomplish this alone, and I'm pleased to see bipartisan support for many bills on the agenda, and to know that Senator Tester has also made this a priority and held a hearing last week to discuss several bills on topics similar to what we will cover today. So I look forward to hearing from the witnesses to better understand the feedback and views of all stakeholders. I cannot say this enough. It is long past time we recognize toxic exposure as a cost of war. And I hope that 2021 will be the year we pass comprehensive legislation that meets the needs of all veterans, current and future, who are exposed to toxic substances while serving our country. Ranking Member Bost, I now recognize you for 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Ranking Member, your microphone is not working. I don't know if it's a technical problem or if you have it turned on.
Let's try. Can you hear it now?
You can hear it now, so why don't you begin?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to welcome our witnesses here today. You know, we are here to discuss one of my top priorities, and that's caring for the veterans who are suffering from toxic exposures. Sometimes service members are exposed to dangers, not just from the enemy, but from the air they breathe, the water they drink, and the ground they walk on. For generations, veterans have struggled getting benefits and services from VA for those sorts of toxic exposures. Their stories are heartbreaking. On several occasions, Congress has stepped in to ensure that they get the care and compensation that they are due. We did that most recently with Blue Water Navy veterans from Vietnam, after they waited decades for the benefits they deserved. Today, we will discuss several legislative proposals that would create a pathway to care and benefits so future generations of toxic exposed veterans don't have to wait that long. Too often, toxic exposed veterans are denied care and benefits because there is not enough science to determine whether their condition is linked to their time in uniform. Establishing that connection could take years. Some veterans don't have that long. We need to help and help now. We must find a way to support them while VA and the scientific community continue to do their research. To that end, some of the bills we will discuss would establish new or amend existing presumptions of exposures. That would ease the burden on toxic exposed veterans to provide to prove that their disability was caused by their service in order to receive benefits. Other bills would expand access to VA care for toxic exposed veterans. My bill, HR 2127, the TEAM Act, would do both. It would create a consistent process within the VA for establishing presumption of exposures. It would also allow toxic exposed veterans to enroll in the VA healthcare system. There are other bills on the agenda introduced by Republican colleagues, including Damage Subcommittee Ranking Member Nails, Representative Zeldin, and Representative Westerman. And I'm grateful to them for being leaders on this important issue and working to improve the lives of veterans and their families. I'm eager to learn more about their proposals and those of our other colleagues. That said, all of them come with a heavy price tag. I look forward to working with my colleagues and the BSOs to find offsets for them. I'm disappointed that the VA did not provide cost estimates or written views on several bills. I appreciate VA's efforts to review how the department cares for toxic exposure veterans, but now is the time for action, not more talk. I hope VA is prepared to provide views and cost estimates verbally today. Finally, I would like to recognize and extend my condolences to the minority witness, Mr. James Price, whose wife, Lauren, recently passed. Mr. and Mrs. Price are longtime constituents of Representative Bilirakis, who is also here with us today. Lauren was dedicated to helping toxic exposed veterans. She was one of them. She knew as well as anyone about the sickness and suffering that toxic exposure can cause. Lauren was a co-director of Veteran Warriors. She was a determined and fierce advocate. She will be missed. Her legacy lives on through her family and her contribution to her fellow veterans. Jim is here to speak on Lauren's experience with toxic exposures as well as his own. Jim, thank you for being here. There are countless veterans and families like yours who are waiting for help. Know that I'm committed to making sure that you don't have to wait much longer. And I know that many of the members on this committee are in that same thought process of trying to move through this process as fast as we can. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I really look forward to engaging with you and the minority on this topic. I think we're on the precipice of doing a really, really important thing for America's veterans. So we will now continue with our first panel, where we'll hear from others who have sponsored legislation on today's agenda. We'll first hear from members of this committee, and then we're going to hear from 8 of our House colleagues. Each member will have 3 minutes to provide comments. Ranking Member Bost, you're recognized for 3 minutes to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you including my legislation, HR 2127, the Toxic Exposure in the American Military, or TEAM Act, on today's agenda. We're here today because veterans and their advocates have told us time and time again the VA is falling short of its mission to care for toxic exposed veterans. When I was ranking member of DAMA committee, I heard from veterans exposed to burn pits about their enrolling in VA's healthcare system and getting a service-connected rating for their disability. Why? Well, because the available science did not yet support their presumption. These veterans were afraid that they would have to wait decades, like veterans of prior conflicts, for the science to catch up with them. They were afraid it would be too late. And they were frustrated by the lack of transparency from VA about decisions to expand presumptions that many allowed toxic exposure veterans to receive care and compensation. I heard their concerns and I share them. We need a system that works for the veterans today and tomorrow. The TEAM Act would create that system. My bill is the result of months of discussions with members of Congress, VA, veterans and military service organizations, particularly those in the TEAM Coalition and others. The TEAM Act would create a regulatory framework that VA must follow for establishing presumptions of service connection related to toxic exposures. VA would also be required to publish presumptive determinations in the Federal Register. Such publications would ensure that veterans and the public can review and comment on the reasons for VA's decisions. Critically, the TEAM Act would allow toxic exposure veterans to enroll in the VA healthcare system. That would ensure that nothing stands between the veterans who are sick and the care that could save their lives. The TEAM Act would also advance research into the health and effects of toxic exposures by authorizing the National Academies of Science reports and establishing toxic exposure commissions. Finally, the TEAM Act would mandate outreach to the veterans and survivors and improve training for the VA staff. My bill would provide current and future generations of toxic exposed veterans with the assurance that they will be taken care of and will have a place to turn for help. I welcome feedback on the TEAM Act. I would like to thank the 30 organizations within the TEAM Coalition that helped to draft this bill and who support it. And I would also like to ask unanimous consent for the TEAM Coalition letter of support to be entered into the hearing record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boston. It just occurs to me, your military service and your family's military service and what, I'm so thankful that our committee has so many veterans has so many veterans serving on the committee. And that includes Chairwoman Luria of the Disability and Assistance Memorial Affairs Subcommittee. I want to recognize you for 3 minutes to present your bill.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Boss, my fellow HVAC colleagues, and our distinguished guests. I appreciate time to speak today in support of the Conceding Our Veterans Exposure Now and Necessitating Training Act, also known as the Covenant Act, legislation to ensure that our nation's veterans can receive the benefits they deserve after being exposed to toxic substances in the course of their service. Mr. Chairman, protecting the quality of life of our veterans is a top priority of this Congress, as you've stated this morning, and particularly for my colleagues on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, where I chair the Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee. One such veteran that I have the privilege of representing, Master Sergeant Brian Graves of Virginia Beach, flew missions over the Middle East for the United States Air Force. And today he lives with breathing problems after inhaling jet fumes and being exposed to other toxins during his service. The Covenant Act will dramatically streamline the VA benefits process for thousands of veterans like Master Sergeant Graves. For instance, the Covenant Act would concede exposure to certain airborne hazards based on service in certain locations throughout the Middle East and beyond, ensuring that the burden of proof of exposure is lifted from the veteran. It would also recognize certain illnesses, such as respiratory conditions and cancers, as presumptive for disability benefit purposes. It would establish a standardized compensation and pension examination and medical opinion process for non-presumptive toxic-related conditions claimed by eligible former service members. And it would also establish a standardized medical training curriculum for airborne hazard-related compensation and pension evaluations, establishing continuity in the VA determinations, whether that exam is conducted from coast to coast, from Loma Linda to here in Hampton Roads. And the Covenant Act would provide its covered veterans with access to Priority 6 Veterans Health Administration hospital care, medical services, and nursing home care. Mr. Chairman, between June 2007 and February 2021, we know that 13,900 veterans filed disability benefit claims related to toxic exposure. Of those nearly 14,000 veterans, only 4,000 claims were granted. And that is simply unacceptable, and we cannot allow history to repeat itself. Veterans like myself watched our peers who served in Vietnam wait decades for the benefits they deserved. The recent veterans who served in the Middle East, Southwest Asia, East Africa, and the Philippines need our help today. They're hurting, Mr. Chairman, and sometimes they are dying from these conditions. Congress must not continue to neglect them in their time of need, and we must recognize these measures of assistance and care are a cost of war. That is why I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the Covenant Act, a comprehensive approach to securing benefits for those veterans exposed to toxic substances overseas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman Luria. I now would like to recognize the ranking member of the DAMA subcommittee, Ranking Member Nels. You're recognized for 3 minutes to comment on your bill.
Chairman Takano, thank you so very much. I am very encouraged to see the committee hosting this important hearing on toxic exposure legislation. As a veteran myself, I've seen how service members are affected by toxic exposures, both during and after their time in service. We must develop a process at VA that provides benefits and care to these veterans for conditions that are linked to their service. That is why I am honored to have the opportunity to speak on my bill, HR 2530, the NUWETOC Atoll Cleanup Radiation Study Act. I would also like to thank DAMA Chair Luria for her support on this bill as the lead Democrat co-sponsor. For those who do not know, in the 50s and 60s, the United States resettled the inhabitants and conducted more than 40 atomic tests in the NUWETOC Atoll, which is located in the Marshall Islands. When these tests ended in 1962, many of the inhabitants wanted to return to their homes. However, the area was contaminated by radiation and had to be cleaned up before it could be resettled. From 1977 to 1980, a group of service members worked very hard to clean up the atoll so it could be returned to the residents. Unfortunately, many of the veterans involved in the cleanup now have illnesses they believe are connected to potential radiation exposure from working and living on the island. They have also discussed their challenges receiving benefits and care through VA for these conditions. Now, the VA often denies these veterans compensation benefits because DOD data found that they were not exposed to harmful levels of radiation. However, during a roundtable, then DAMA Chairman Boss in the 115th Congress, along with the National Academies of Science, or NAS, reported concerns with the accuracy of DOD's methodology. No veteran should be denied benefits based on outdated or incorrect science. HR 2530 would address these questions by requiring VA to partner with NAS to examine the adequacy of DOD study. NAS would also provide a new estimate for the amount of radiation these veterans may have been exposed. Additionally, NAS would explain whether it recommends further research into their exposure. Lastly, the VA would be required to report to the House and Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs any actions it plans to take based on the NAS study. This bill is the critical first step ensuring these veterans receive the benefits they have earned. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for the opportunity to speak on my bill. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Nels. I really do appreciate your passion for this topic. I continue to be impressed by the bipartisan commitment. I also want to acknowledge your service to our country, as I did with Ranking Member Bost and with Chair Luria. I now would like to call on the chair of our Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, Chairman Pfas, and I recognize you for 3 minutes to comment on your bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Bost, for the opportunity to testify today in support of my legislation. It's H.R. 2742, the Pfas Registry Act. This bill, which I introduced alongside a bipartisan group of colleagues from the House PFAS Task Force, would direct the Department of Veterans Affairs to create a national database for service members and veterans with health concerns due to potential exposure from PFAS. These forever chemicals persist in water sources, have been known to increase serious risk of health conditions, including cancer. PFAS contamination is particularly prevalent on and near active and former military bases due to the use of PFAS-containing firefighting foam by armed services. In recent reports, the Department of Defense has identified more than 600 military installations and surrounding communities whose drinking water may be contaminated with PFAS. One such example in my district is the Pease International Trade Port, which formerly served as an Air Force base and now has serious environmental and groundwater contamination. People for years were drinking contaminated water on that base. And actually just yesterday, I was at the dedication of a new drinking water treatment facility that's delivering clean water to that area. But more needs to be done to deal with the legacy contamination and the health concerns that individuals have. Service members, veterans, and their families who served at places like Pease, as well as 600 other installations across the country, deserve to have access to the latest updates about recent scientific developments on PFAS, the availability of possible treatment options, and information on what resources may be available to address their health concerns. With the scientific and public health communities continuing to learn about the risk of PFAS and the data that's coming out of late, I think it's really critical that we pass this Pfas Registry Act and establish a database to ensure that all those who may have been exposed to this contamination through their service to our nation can stay up to date on the information and potential treatment options. By doing so, we can protect the health and well-being of those who have worn the uniform of this country. So I'm really grateful for the bipartisan support on this bill, the way that VSOs have chimed in favor of it. And I'm grateful that we are having this opportunity to put a variety of legislative opportunities on the table to make sure we're doing all we can to address contamination among our veteran population. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Chair Pappas. I will now like to turn to Representative Slotkin, who was before coming to Congress, was part of our intelligence service, and we also thank her for her service to our country. Representative Slotkin, you're recognized for 3 minutes to comment on your bill.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, to the members of the committee for the opportunity to speak on HR 2436, which is the Veterans Burn Pits Exposure Recognition Act. First, I want to thank the committee for taking on the issue of toxic exposure in this Congress and our commitment to working on it in a bipartisan way. It's just a really important signal to our veterans. And I'm really encouraged by the conversation that we're having today. I've heard a ton of painful stories across my state about those who are suffering from toxic exposure due to these burn pits that many of us served next to when we were serving abroad. And then the fight with the VA that they then have just to get an acknowledgement, a basic awareness of the care that they need. This issue is close to my heart. I served 3 tours alongside the military and lived near a burn pit all 3 of those tours. My husband was 30 years in the Army, and my stepdaughter is a brand new Army officer. I literally think about her and what she will have to do one day if she's exposed, and the fight that I don't want her to have with the VA. For years, this has been common practice. We dump whatever we have in terms of waste, everything from human waste to batteries to jet fuel in these burn pits. And service members are exposed to the constant fumes that are coming off of those pits. To be very direct, I believe that burn pits are our generation's Agent Orange. Just as previous generations were exposed to Agent Orange in their service and had to fight to get coverage and acknowledgement, that is what I feel like we're doing today with burn pits. That's why back in April, myself and Congressman Peter Meyer from Michigan, who also served in Iraq alongside burn pits, introduced this bill to make it easier for veterans to cut through the red tape. Right now, the burden of proof is on the veteran to show that toxic exposure. And to put this in context on Agent Orange, we passed legislation in 1991, 39 years after many people served. And for Blue Water Navy, 57 years after they served, they finally got acknowledgement for this exposure. Under our new law, the VA would be required to perform a medical exam to consider the effects of those chemicals. There would be a list of countries where people were exposed. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that this is going to be a part of what I think will be landmark toxic exposure legislation, something that will be transformative on the issue of burn pits, PFAS, a whole other thing, and an acknowledgement that we have to do something now and learn from the lessons of Agent Orange for our veterans and for our VA. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Slotkin, and I agree with you. I do believe we're on the precipice of doing something monumental for our nation's veterans. I now would like to recognize someone who, there's no one with greater passion for America's veterans who've been exposed to burn pits. Stands alongside Representative Slotkin, my good friend and neighbor. Dr. Ruiz, you're recognized for 3 minutes to comment on your bill.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, for your work and leadership on toxic exposures. Look, veterans are dying as delayed casualties of war or suffering from permanent disabilities from their exposures to carcinogens and other toxic chemicals emitted from burn pits used by the military. This is a Department of Defense self-inflicted wound. As an emergency physician and public health expert, I understand the science and urgency to act and save our veterans' lives. That is why I recently reintroduced with Republican Representative Fitzpatrick and Senators Gillibrand and Rubio the bipartisan, bicameral HR 2372, the Presumptive Benefits for Warfighters Exposed to Burn Pits and Other Toxins Act of 2021 to get our veterans the care they need and deserve. Under current law, a veteran who has an illness or disability must establish a direct service connection in order to be eligible for VA benefits. That means that after serving and sacrificing for our nation, veterans exposed to burn pits face a cumbersome and in many cases impossible burden of proof to provide enough evidence to establish a direct service connection between their health and exposure. We can and must do better. And my bill offers the most comprehensive coverage for our veterans by removing the burden of proof from the veteran. To receive presumption of service connection, a veteran would only need to submit documentation that they received a medal associated with the global war on terror or the Gulf War, and that they suffer from a qualifying health condition. Additionally, my bill would grant a veteran health care for burn pit exposure ailments and for other toxic exposures, disability compensation, and death benefits to a spouse or dependents. This is the most aggressive and comprehensive legislative initiative aimed at tackling the immediate healthcare crisis that too many of our veterans are facing. I first learned of the effects of burn pits when one of my constituents, Jennifer Kepner, 39-year-old Air Force veteran with a healthy lifestyle, no other risk factors, came to my office for help. She was battling pancreatic cancer with her oncologist, determined was likely linked to exposure to burn pits. I sat with her in her home as she told her story, and I can tell you that was one of the most impactful kitchen table conversations I've ever had. She spent her last month as a leading voice for her fellow veterans exposed to burn pits, which she called the Agent Orange of our generation. I was at her bedside with her husband and 2 children when she died on October 18, 2017. Her story continues to be an inspiration in this fight to protect veterans and their families from the pain and suffering she experienced, both from burn pits and from her difficult experiencing navigating the VA. As an emergency physician, I can tell you that in science and medicine, we know that if you have a high enough suspicion of an agent that causes a severe enough consequence, then you need to act on that suspicion. We have, according to the literature and science, enough suspicion, and veterans are dying. Therefore, we need to act, this Congress, to provide the relief, the care that our veterans need. With that, I thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. I now would like to recognize Representative Westerman for 3 minutes to comment on his bill. Representative Westerman, you're recognized. Apparently, Representative Westerman is not on the Zoom site yet, so we will move on to recognize Representative Lynch, and if Mr. Westerman comes back, we'll recognize him. Representative Lynch, you're recognized for 3 minutes to comment on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Ranking Member Boss. I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of HR 1355, which is the K2 Veterans Care Act. I'd also like to commend Chairwoman Luria and Ranking Member Nels of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and all of the members of the committee for your commitment to improving the lives of America's nearly 20 million veterans. Earlier this Congress, and I think you said it best, Mr. Chairman, you said that the burden of proof shouldn't be on our veterans, and there's no reason that they and their survivors should have to fight the VA for the care and benefits they've earned. And that sums it up. That's the situation we're in. As the chairman of the Subcommittee on National Security, I certainly agree with your statement. It's in line with this committee's landmark efforts to ensure that American veterans receive the health care and benefits that are commensurate with their service to our country. I introduced K2, the K2 Veterans Care Act with my colleague, Representative Mark Green of Tennessee, who served at K2 and also has publicly acknowledged he's also suffering health effects of his service there. This legislation has over 70 bipartisan co-sponsors. As most of the members understand, especially on the Veterans Committee, between 2001 and 2005, there were more than 15,000 American service members that deployed to Karshi-Kanabad, or K2, which is a former Soviet air base in southern Uzbekistan, to provide operational and strategic support to the U.S. mission in Afghanistan right after September 11th. So these were some of the first people on the ground. As evidenced by declassified documents released by my subcommittee, these dedicated servicemen and women were exposed to multiple toxic chemicals and radiological hazards during their deployments, including dangerous petrochemicals, volatile organic compounds, and depleted uranium, and also burn pit smoke, which has also been the subject of this morning's hearing. In the years following their service, more than 400 K2 veterans have self-reported multiple forms of cancers and debilitating illnesses, also very rare cancers, brain cancers. Many of these veterans have been diagnosed later in life. As a result, the burden of proof falls to the individual veteran when applying for health care or disability benefits from the VA to demonstrate that his or her illness is service-connected, which more often than not results in a denial. The K2 Veterans Act would remedy this wrong. The bill would establish a presumption of service-connected disability and require the VA to provide hospital care, medical services, and nursing home care for K2 veterans. for diseases or illnesses associated with exposure to jet fuel, volatile organic compounds, burn pit toxins, and other toxic substances, all of which were known to have been present at K2. The legislation is narrowly tailored to those veterans who deployed to K2 and has been endorsed by various veterans service organizations, including the Stronghold Freedom Foundation, which done great work on this, the VFW, the DAV, and the Wounded Warrior Project. I want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and to the members of the Veterans Affairs Committee for allowing me this opportunity to testify in support of HR 1355. I'm happy to answer questions that members may have, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lynch. And I neglected to highlight your role as the chair of the subcommittee on national security on the Oversight Committee, and you certainly bring your insights and experience to the legislation which you're presenting to us today. We thank you for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I understand that Representative Westerman is with us now. Representative Westerman, I want to recognize you for 3 minutes to present your legislation.
Thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Boston. Apologize for the technical difficulties earlier. I was on and then I was off, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Veterans Affairs Committee about how toxic exposure has affected many veterans and how my bill, the Keeping Our Promises Act, will ensure Vietnam era veterans exposed to Agent Orange receive the proper benefits they have earned. Specifically, the bill will codify 6 diseases for the VA to recognize as eligible for benefits due to toxic exposure. 5 of these conditions have suggestive evidence of an association, and the 6th, hypertension, is proven to have sufficient evidence of an association. This science-backed evidence is determined by a biennial National Academy of Sciences report commissioned by the original Agent Orange Act of 1991. The VA is required to make benefits recommendations based on these reports, but has failed to properly include these diseases despite the proven evidence. The Keeping Our Promises Act will provide these benefits and bar costs from being a factor in adding future diseases. Additionally, this bill will reauthorize the VA Secretary authority to grant a presumption of service connection based on the National Academy of Sciences reports and all other sound medical evidence available. Lastly, the bill will ensure veterans and survivors of veterans who are currently receiving compensations for a connected disease will continue to receive compensation and care even if the VA decides to remove a disease from the presumptive diseases list. Providing benefits and care to our servicemen and women is a duty that we must honor, and I am proud to lead the charge. I introduced a previous version of the Keeping Our Promises Act in the 116th Congress and was glad to see 59 of my bipartisan colleagues sign on as co-sponsors. Thanks to our advocacy, we were successfully able to include 3 more diseases to the presumptive list of Agent Orange exposure through the 2021 NDAA. This is a great step, and I hope we continue to follow the science and expand the list to these other diseases with suggestive or sufficient evidence. Thank you for the time speaking on this important matter, and I hope the committee and my colleagues will continue to show support and advocacy for our Vietnam veterans. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter of support from the Military Veterans Advocacy, which includes support for my bill, HR 2268.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Westerman. We appreciate your contribution to today's hearing. I now would like to call on a representative who is not a member of our committee, but who also served in uniform for our nation, is also a veteran. I'd like to recognize Representative Zeldin to present for 3 minutes on his legislation.
Thank you so much, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and the entire House Veterans Affairs Committee for inviting me here today to speak about HR 1273, the bipartisan Vietnam Veterans Liver Fluke Cancer Study Act. While our courageous service members were deployed to Southeastern and Eastern Asia during the Vietnam War, many of them consumed raw or undercooked freshwater fish. Preliminary reports indicate that those veterans could be carrying the dormant parasite commonly known as liver fluke. The liver fluke parasite has, in several instances, led to the contraction of serious life-threatening health conditions such as bile duct cancer and liver disease. A 2018 study at the Northport Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northport, New York, conducted a first-of-its-kind study of liver fluke in the United States using a 50 veteran sample size. While the sample size was admittedly smaller than most studies, initial results highlight a substantial need for a greater examination of this issue, the development of standardized treatment options, and broader access to care for veterans at VA facilities across the country. The Vietnam Veterans Liver Fluke Cancer Study Act would require the Department of Veterans Affairs, in conjunction with the Centers for Disease Control, to conduct a larger study to help determine the prevalence of liver fluke amongst the Vietnam-era veteran population and the link between a veteran's service record and affliction. Our nation's veterans have earned nothing less than the highest quality care, and it is our responsibility as Americans to develop a plan, secure funding to test all veterans whose service exposed them to liver fluke, and if necessary, provide appropriate care, and to do so as soon as possible. It's absolutely critical that we tackle this issue head on. The clock is ticking. I've heard from countless veterans, not only in my own district, but from around the country, who have been pushing the VA to take action on this matter for years, all while battling bile duct cancer and liver disease. This isn't right. We can and must do better. I thank the committee for your continued support and advocacy on behalf of America's veterans, and all the incredible VSOs and nonprofit organizations for their support of this bill, including the Wounded Warrior Project, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, VFW, Minority Veterans of America, Military Officers Association of America, Paralyzed Veterans of America, Vietnam Veterans of America, Military Veterans Advocacy, and the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. I look forward to working with all of them and all of you on the committee to ensure our veterans receive the care they have rightfully earned without delay and without tribulation. Thank you again for holding today's great hearing. It's an honor to be part of the committee for today's discussion. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Zeldin. We appreciate your contribution to today's hearing. I now would like to turn to recognize a friend and colleague from the state of New York, Representative Tonko, to present on his legislation.
I think he turned off his camera accidentally.
Representative Tonko, we can't hear. He might have accidentally.
He's got his hand raised.
Representative Tonko, we can't see. Is your camera turned off? And we can't hear you.
I am here, Mr. Chair. I apologize. I had a little bit of difficulty, but I'm back on, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, and I just want to point out to everyone that you also chair the subcommittee on energy and commerce on the environment. And so obviously there's a clear expertise in terms of toxic exposure. So we welcome your insights and we welcome your participation today, and you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I come before you to advocate for the thousands of veterans who served at Fort Mcclellan in Anniston, Alabama, and who are seeking to understand the long-term severe health impacts they have suffered as a result of that service. Fort McClellan and the neighboring city of Anniston, Alabama, have been designated as one of the most polluted sites in the nation. Until its closure in 1999, Fort McClellan was a U.S. military chemical and biological weapons training center, and for much of the same time, the location of the United States Women's Army Corps and Military Police School. In addition to that chemical and biological weapons exposure, the fort was situated just miles from an enormous chemical manufacturing plant that spewed tons of PCBs into the air, soil, and water until 1971. This contamination remains a hazard still today. When I was first elected to Congress in 2008, I met with a constituent who, like many women who served during that period, was stationed at Fort McClellan in the 1970s as part of the Women's Army Corps. As my office investigated this issue further, we heard from hundreds of America's service veterans from all over the country who had served at Fort McClellan and later experienced often devastating health issues consistent with PCB and other forms of toxic substance exposure. Conditions those veterans have reported include various forms of cancer, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, diabetes, heart disease, and numerous other reproductive, autoimmune, and neurological problems. Yet while there have been numerous studies detailing the adverse health impacts of PCB exposure for residents of nearby Anniston, amazingly, no comprehensive study has ever been conducted on our veterans who served at Fort McClellan. These veterans served and sacrificed for us, and they have paid a terrible price for it. We owe it to them to do better. So I have introduced legislation HR 2825, the Fort McClellan Health Registry Act, that would notify current and former service members who served at Fort McClellan that they may have been exposed to one of these dangerous substances and create a voluntary health study to assess their health conditions and claims. Over the years, since that constituent brought this matter to my attention, our call to support our Fort McClellan veterans has drawn the support of more than 100 members of Congress, veteran service organizations, and grassroots organizations. Yet despite that overwhelming support and equally profound levels of public health evidence, we have made little progress until this point. After more than 10 years of work on this legislation, and with the support and counsel of many members of this committee, we are finally taking critical steps to determine the best way to address service-connected illnesses that have plagued the lives of far too many. I want to personally thank those of you on this committee on both sides of the aisle who have given your support to this pro-veteran legislation in the past, and for this current coordinated effort to bring attention to the challenges facing our veterans across the nation who continue to suffer from exposure to toxic substances. Our task here is simple. Let's get the basic information we need to affirm this link and help these veterans get the care they deserve. I know there are differences of opinion on the best way forward, whether through a registry or some other method, to give the impacted Fort McClellan veterans a path forward. While I do not pretend to have all the answers, I am eager to work with anyone from either party to build a solution that makes real progress for the veterans who have been struggling for so long. Based on the many thousands of veterans who were stationed at Fort McClellan across multiple decades, the odds are very good that everyone on this committee has Fort McClellan veterans in your district. Many will have similar stories. Nearly all are frustrated. They need us to act now and make this right. This is not a local problem, this is a national problem. And caring for our veterans is not just the right thing to do, it's our job and our duty. And if anyone here has the lingering doubt about that, then this is a debate worth having. So I urge this committee to take swift and decisive action to advance the Fort McClellan Health Registry Act or any related legislation that would meaningfully address the needs of the Fort McClellan veterans. With that, Mr. Chair, I thank you for your service to our veterans, for your outstanding leadership, and I yield back the balance of my time.
You went slightly over, but Chair Tonko, let me just say that I actually do have Fort McClellan veterans in my district. They've come to my town halls, and we actually have a Fort McClellan veteran on the Veterans Committee staff, majority staff. And I thank you for your many years of championing this issue. I know this is not the first Congress that you've introduced this legislation. So we thank you for your passion. We thank you for your commitment to our America's veterans.
Well, thank you for your flexibility, Mr. Chair, too. I appreciate it. I apologize, but it's a very strong fight that's worth fighting.
I didn't have the heart to stop you, so go ahead.
Thank you.
I now call on Representative Cartwright, who is chair of our CGS subcommittee on appropriations. And Representative Cartwright, I recognize you for 3 minutes to present on your legislation.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Takano. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir. So
very good.
Please.
And again, thank you, Chairman Takano.
Can you turn on your camera? Is it possible for you to turn on your camera?
Is my camera not showing me?
Yeah, I don't see the camera on.
All right, hang on.
There it is. You've now turned on your camera.
Okay.
Okay. Now it's turned off again.
Now it's turned off again. All right, I'll make it quick. This is about HR 2569. Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Bost and members of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. I can tell you that this is the Veterans Agent Orange Exposure Equity Act. And what this does is that it levels the playing field for Vietnam War era veterans who served in Laos, Thailand, and Cambodia. You know that we have opened up avenues of compensation for Agent Orange exposure for Vietnam War veterans, including in the Blue Water Navy veterans have now been allowed to put in for compensation for Agent Orange exposure. And the burden of proof is lessened. There are presumptions that are allowed for Vietnam War veterans, including Blue Water Navy veterans. These do not apply if you haven't served physically in Vietnam. Now we know that in those three countries, Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand, Agent Orange was used and it was stored. And we know that a lot of veterans who served in those places were exposed to that. And so this is a bill to level the playing field for our American veterans who, through no fault of their own, were exposed to Agent Orange, and also through no fault of their own, served in those places and not within the physical confines of Vietnam itself. And so this is a very important bill because these people suffered every bit as much as people who served in the physical confines of Vietnam. And so I'm very proud to introduce this legislation, and I seek the blessing of your august committee for my legislation. Thank you so much.
Well, I've never heard the committee called august, but I'll take it. Thank you, Representative Cartwright, for your contribution today. And we always like the friendship of appropriators, especially cardinals, on this committee. And so we thank you for your contribution today. I now would like to recognize a fellow teacher and somebody who, when she came to Congress as the first African-American ever to be elected from the state of Connecticut, someone who understood instinctively my concerns about student veterans, and we've worked together to revise and to reform the way for-profit colleges operate in our country, and we've worked together on that legislation. I welcome her today to present on her legislation related to toxic exposure. Representative Hayes from the state of Connecticut for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for holding this hearing and for welcoming me here to talk about my bill, the Palamaris Veterans Act. Before coming to Congress, and unfortunately, like many Americans, I was unfamiliar with the 1966 nuclear accident at Palamares, Spain, where over 1,600 service members were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. I cringe as I say that because I am a history teacher by training. So the fact that my class and my students never discussed this really speaks to the issue here about how little emphasis is placed on this event. And it wasn't until speaking with veterans and veteran service organizations and the Yale Veterans Legal Service Clinic that I became fully aware of the incidents in Palamares, Spain. For those who do not know, over 55 years ago, a B-52 bomber collided with a KC-135 tanker aircraft over the Spanish village of Palamares, resulting in one of the largest nuclear disasters in history and causing radiation exposure to approximately 1,600 US airmen who responded to the crash. These airmen were sent to respond to this nuclear accident with little or no protective clothing and were not warned of the potential dangers. They were ordered to clear the contaminated crops, shovel tainted soil into burn pits, and consume the local food and water, placing them in direct contact with large amounts of plutonium. Decades later, many of these airmen are suffering and dying from the health conditions that likely came from handling this radioactive dust. But the VA still does not count Palamares as a radiation risk event, or provide these veterans with the disability benefits they are entitled to. The failure to recognize the sacrifice of these veterans is a breach of our responsibility to those who served. My bill would correct this, ensuring these veterans get the health care and benefits they deserve, and ensuring that their surviving spouses and children are eligible for the benefits they deserve. Time is of the essence for these veterans. I urge this committee to expeditiously consider this legislation and get those who served and sacrificed the help they deserve as quickly as possible. I continue to welcome co-sponsors on this bill, HR 2580, and I ask all of my colleagues to join in this effort to support this critical legislation. Thank you, Chairman Takano, for your support on this important legislation and for having me here today and prioritizing toxic exposure legislation during this Congress. We must all work together to prevent these type of incidents for future veterans and provide them with accessible and affordable health care. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Hayes, for recounting this not well-known piece of our history and for your contribution to today's hearing. So before we move on to the second panel, does anyone have any questions for our first panel? And I will take a moment to pause to make sure that there's no hands raised. I do not see any hands raised. I do see a hand raised. Representative Capter, you have a question or a comment?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members, for your excellent testimony and the hard work it took for each of those bills. I just wanted to say, having served on the Veterans Committee going back to the 1980s when we were first facing Agent Orange, and the VA kept saying to us, well, you don't have all the medical proof. And this was over and over and over again. And we had a member from Ohio, Doug Applegate, and I'll never forget his quote. He said, there's a difference between what is scientifically provable and morally right. Subsequent to the passage of legislation creating the first Agent Orange Center in the state of New York, the nation went on to learn more about Agent Orange. Congress was ahead of science, and maybe on many of these bills and the measures individuals are bringing forward, which I compliment you for, we should keep that quote in mind. There's a difference between what is scientifically provable today and what is morally right for their service. And I'll just say, I just left an event about a week ago with the general who is head of the New York National Guard, who grew up in our district and is revered as a Latina and someone who has risen to the highest ranks of our military. And she was in Iraq, and she talked to me about burn pits, and she has contracted cancers in her life already. So I just, is it connected? We shouldn't wait too long. We should help those who serve and have served. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Capter. We thank you for that institutional history and your service now and your service back when you first came to Congress as the longest serving woman in Congress, and also as the most senior member of the Appropriations Committee. We certainly appreciate Friends on Appropriations. I now would like to call on Dr. Murphy, Representative Murphy. You have a question?
Yes, sir. I'd like to read a statement, if at all possible, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Thank you. And I want to thank specifically, this is in support of HR 2192, the Camp Lejeune Justice Act. And I want to thank specifically Representative Cartwright. I don't know if he's on the call anymore. And also Representative David Price from North Carolina in support of this. I'd just like to point out, we often hear that struggles that are of our service members, and we've heard them today, that they and their family members face as part of their service to the United States. Those struggles should never happen due to failure or negligence by the federal government, but they unfortunately did at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, which is in my district, from the 1950s through the 1980s. During that time, at the base, thousands of Marines, their families, civilian workers, and other personnel were exposed to tap water that was contaminated with harmful chemicals found at levels ranging from 240 to 3,400 times the levels permitted by safety standards. These exposures likely increase the risk of cancers. And I don't say that lightly. I'm a physician, and just because one's been exposed to something and developed cancer does not mean that those are causes. But they were disposed, and these exposures likely increase the risks of several cancers: kidney cancer, which I deal with, multiple myeloma, leukemia, and several others. They also increase the risk of adverse birth outcomes, as well as other negative health effects. The Janey-Ensminger Act, which was passed in 2012, authorized medical care for military and family members who lived at Camp Lejeune and developed conditions that they thought were tied to the base water contamination. While this legislation was a starting point, more needed to be done to get help to the people who are impacted. That's why I'm asking for support for HR 2192, known as the Camp Lejeune Justice Act. This bill specifically amends the Federal Judicial Code to authorize a new tort claim against the United States, and specifically allows a tort claim for damages related to the injuries or the death of the member of the U.S. Armed Forces and or their family or friends, or family rather, and caused by a negligent and wrongful act and arising out of the violation of environmental law at Camp Lejeune from August of 53 to December of 87. We've had 12 separate VSOs sign on. I'm hopeful that in this bipartisan act, which we have folks from both committees, or both parties rather, sign on, that other VSOs will sign on in support of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the time, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Thank you for your statement. And of course, I really appreciate that we have you and Dr. Ruiz and on our committee bringing your medical expertise and credibility to the work we do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now, before we move on, do I see are there any other members who wish to ask a question or make a comment at this time? All right, seeing none. If not, I now invite our second panel to the witness table. So joining us from the Department of Veterans Affairs is Dr. Ronald Burke, Deputy Undersecretary for Policy and Oversight, the Veterans Benefit Administration, accompanied by Beth Murphy, Executive Director for Compensation Service, Ms. Patricia Hastings, Chief Consultant for Post-Deployment Health Services, and Dr. Carl Kelsey, representing the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I appreciate all the work and research the academies have provided on military toxic exposures and scientific methods for determining related health impacts. I look forward to hearing from all of you. I will remind our witnesses to please pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that the recording will capture all of your words. And please remember to do so when answering members' questions. Your written statements in full will be included in the hearing record and without hearing record without objection. Mr. Burke, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to present your statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today along with my colleagues. In the opening statement of his confirmation hearing, Secretary McDonough made it clear that VA would provide veterans with timely world-class health care and ensure veterans and their families have timely access to their benefits. It is clear by the number of toxic exposure bills before us today that military toxic and environmental exposure is a critical congressional interest item. For decades, veterans and their families have sought answers to questions about health issues and potential connections to service-related toxic exposures. Secretary McDonough is committed to taking immediate and deliberate steps to ensure the department leans forward in its approach to getting answers to key environmental exposure questions. We acknowledge that VA must continuously evaluate how we approach researching and granting claims for disabilities related to toxic and environmental exposures. We recognize that to succeed, the new approach will require the collective efforts of VA, our academic partners, other federal agencies, and Congress. Secretary McDonough has outlined a list of priorities that form the foundation for the work that he has directed the department to undertake. To ensure in-depth analysis of high priority issues, the Secretary reestablished the VA Executive Board, consisting of subject matter experts and senior leaders. The VA Executive Board met on March 23rd of this year and received clear guidance to focus on issues related to toxic exposures and providing input to inform solutions. While the Executive Board-led review is designed to be holistic, it is not necessary to conduct a review to know that there are some things that we can and must do differently today. Historically, VA's presumptive decision-making process has been guided by statutory requirements. However, certain provisions of the Agent Orange Act and Persian Gulf War Veterans Act, notably those governing the use of National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine reports, and requiring the Secretary to respond to such reports in 60 days, have expired. With that expiration, we see an opportunity. VA is creating a new, comprehensive, modernized decision-making model for determining presumptions based on environmental exposures. Our model includes leveraging improved science and surveillance, better use of VA benefits claims data, and consideration of other factors. We are moving with a sense of urgency and hope to share the proposed model with Congress, BSOs, and other key partners for feedback within the next 180 days. In order to do a better job researching exposure to toxic substances and military environmental hazards, we need more insight into the health issues that veterans are experiencing. Our research indicates that an overly cumbersome process and an assumption of denial discourages veterans from filing toxic and environmental exposure-related claims. At the Secretary's direction, we are undertaking efforts to encourage veterans who believe their symptoms are related to toxic exposure to participate in health registries. Part of that effort will include encouraging veterans to get a compensation and pension exam and to submit a claim to VA if there is a concern about exposure. A new DoD and VA effort that will help in this future is the individual longitudinal exposure record that just went active for clinical care and will be available for claims and research. With 1 in 3 veterans reporting a possible exposure to military environmental hazards and 1 in 4 veterans reporting health concerns due to deployment exposures, VA must take decisive action. The Secretary has directed that we take a new and decisive approach. This holistic approach involves reviewing all major touch points within the agency for a veteran who has experienced toxic exposure, as well as internal agency functions within this area. The review of both claims data functions and VHA data and information as part of this review. While Secretary McDonough's end-to-end review is being completed, VA will take the following additional steps. Number 1, expand training for healthcare providers. 2, improve science, surveillance, epidemiology, and research. 3, make better use of benefits data and consider other factors. And 4, encourage veterans to file a claim. I refer you to the written testimony for additional details regarding these steps. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. My colleagues and I are prepared to respond to any questions you or other members of the committee may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Burke. I now turn to Dr. Kelsey and recognize Dr. Kelsey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. I appear today as a member of several National Academies committees that assessed the evidence of a relationship between exposures encountered during military service and adverse health effects. I'll focus on the standards used for weighing and assessing epidemiologic evidence of exposure to toxins and health effects of those exposures. I'll describe the differences between association and causation and give examples of how those standards were used in the National Academy's reports. The criteria for causation are more stringent than those for association and are more difficult to satisfy. Correlation does not equal causation. Observed links or associations can be due to many factors. Causality is more than a link. It is a demonstration that an exposure is responsible for a specific health outcome. Many factors may be considered when deciding whether an observed statistical association is causal. These include the strength of the association, the dose-time response relationship, consistency of the evidence through replication, and others. But in every case of causality, the exposure comes before the outcome. For every exposure-outcome relationship, there will be gradations of evidence uncertainty, chance, confounding, and bias related to errors in selection and measurement, or factors can hide or create the appearance of causation or association. The National Academy's study committees carefully consider these factors. There have been numerous studies, health studies of veterans, but most have been hampered by the lacking or weak measures of exposure and by other methodologic problems. For example, no objective measurements of exposure to herbicides are available for most Vietnam veterans. Instead, and in accord with Congress's mandated presumption of herbicide exposure of all Vietnam veterans, National Academies committees have used Vietnam veteran status as a proxy for herbicide or Agent Orange exposure when no more specific exposure information is available. Similarly, research regarding exposure to open burn pits has been impeded by relatively poor measures of exposure. As a result, it's not possible to determine quantitative estimates of increased risks or to estimate the number of service members and veterans affected. When reliable and accurate exposure information is not available for military populations, deployment to a particular area is used as a proxy for exposure. That may be as general as a particular country or region, such as the Southwest Asia theater. Causal models and inference are dependent on high-quality data. Poor exposure assessment and use of such proxies as deployed or non-deployed limit the ability to inform causality. The evidence assessed to determine causality is continuing to evolve, and in recent years, causality determination has become much more complex as new methods evolve, technologies advance, and we learn more about how factors such as genetics, stress, and the social determinants of health influence overall well-being. The Agent Orange Act tasked the National Academy's studies committees with evaluating evidence and drawing conclusions that are based on statistical association, not on causality, when assessing the health effects of herbicide exposure. The four categories that we have used are sufficient, limited or suggestive, inadequate or insufficient, and no association. The default category for any health outcome is inadequate or insufficient until enough evidence is accumulated to reclassify it into a different category. The classifications of health outcomes are based on the study committee's evaluation of the epidemiologic literature and evidence of biological plausibility or mechanistic data. They reflect a committee's judgment of the relative certainty of the association between the outcome and the exposure to herbicides used in Vietnam. The category descriptions reflect variations in the completeness and the quality of the evidence and the degree of certainty about an association or lack of evidence of an association. Similarly, the National Academies committees that authored the Gulf War and Health series applied similar categorical framework, but included a fifth category of sufficient evidence of a causal relationship, as they were not constrained by law to classify the outcomes solely by association. This approach was developed to be flexible enough to be applicable to a range of various exposures and incorporate epidemiologic, toxicologic, and mechanistic data. Without information on the extent of exposure among veterans and quantitative information about the dose-time response relationship for each health outcome in humans, estimation of the risks experienced by veterans exposed to specific hazards is not possible. Although the record keeping has improved and exposure estimation has been incrementally better on the whole, there are still few instances when it makes sense to use causality standards to assess the effects of military exposures. As a result, for the near future, the nature of the data that exists and are available will usually allow National Academies committees to classify association between exposure and health effects on the basis of association rather than causation. I appreciate the opportunity to testify here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Kelsey. We are very honored and pleased to have you here. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. My first question is to Mr. Burke. I just want to say that the VA's lack of direct views and testimony on the bills we have before us is concerning. The goals of this committee and VA should be the same, to quickly provide the necessary care and benefits that veterans have earned, And the best and only way to accomplish this is if we work together. So, Mr. Burke, what assurances can you provide to this committee that VA will indeed work collaboratively with Congress to provide the necessary reforms to the toxic exposure claims process as VA completes the end-to-end review described in your testimony?
So, Mr. Chairman, my responses today are not designed to frustrate or disappoint the committee, but rather to impress upon the committee the Secretary's commitment to make this his top priority issue. We have worked for years collaboratively. We will continue to work collaboratively. That is an expectation of the Secretary. That is the direction of the Secretary. And at this point, allowing the Secretary to build his framework for a new and improved way to address toxic exposures is what we're here to convey today. So I appreciate the committee's interest in this level. I can assure you that it is a top priority for the Secretary, and you have our commitment, our continued commitment to collaborate with this committee as well as other members of Congress.
Well, thank you for that, Burke. I certainly hope that we can work together collaboratively. I want to turn to another question. Congress took action to provide benefits to Vietnam veterans suffering from bladder cancer, hyperthyroidism, and Parkinsonism last Congress due to a lack of response on VA's part to respond to the recommendations in the 2016 National Academy's report on veterans and Agent Orange. Why should we trust that VA will unilaterally act in a timely fashion to address other toxic exposure scenarios?
Again, sir, thank you for that question. I can assure you that the importance of this topic is not lost on the Secretary. In fact, by means of standing up the VA Executive Board, making his first meeting critically clear that this is an important topic, I can assure you that the department is committed to not only working with Congress, but to addressing this in a more holistic, faster, more accurate approach that is desperately needed. So you have our commitment. The Secretary has made that very clear. That is one of his marching orders, and therefore we are committed to doing just that.
Well, thank you. Can you let us know the status of the implementation of the 3 new Agent Orange presumptive disabilities?
Sir, at this time, I can tell you that there is a procedural memo going through concurrence. We hope to have that finalized here in the very near future. And I will defer to my colleague, the Executive Director of Compensation Service, Ms. Beth Murphy, for any additional details.
Yes, Mr. Burke, that's correct. We have a policy letter that would lay out interim procedures so that our 56 regional offices can begin processing these claims. Normally, it's about an 18 to 24 month rulemaking process. We know that takes longer than we want or our veterans or members of Congress want before we start paying these claims. So we've leaned in at the Secretary's direction, and that document is near the end of the concurrence process, is my understanding. So we're talking a few months rather than a couple of years, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Kelsey, the committee is looking to streamline VA's decision-making process for determining a relationship between exposures and service and various illnesses. Can you quickly explain the recommended framework the National Academy's outlined in its 2008 report on improving the presumptive disability decision-making process?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. The 2008 committee was really charged with the purpose of assessing the process, which is includes, as I think you can appreciate, a lot of additional factors, not the least of which is political, which I assume everyone here is much more in touch with than I am. But the political and social aspects of the rulemaking were included in their assessment. They proposed different categories for describing the likelihood of a causal relationship. They proposed sufficient, equipoise and above, below equipoise, and against. And those categories can be, I think, explained succinctly, if you'd like. They're sufficient in saying that the evidence is sufficient to conclude a causal relationship exists. Equipoise and above posits that the evidence is sufficient to conclude that a causal relationship is at least as likely as not, but sufficient evidence to conclude that a causal relationship exists is not there. Below is similarly, evidence is not sufficient to conclude that a causal relationship is at least as likely or not. And against, evidence suggests a lack of a causal relationship.
Dr. Kelsey, I'm going to have to stop you there. It was unfair for me to ask you a question that had such a substantive response. I will have to hope that some other members will pick up on that topic. So I'm sorry. I do want to call on the Ranking Member Bost for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Burke, the first question I need to ask is from you, and that is, does the VA support HR 2127, the TEAM Act? Why or why not?
Sir, thank you for that question. I appreciate your interest in this matter. As you are aware, VA has taken a singular position with all 15 of these bills. And the perspective is, and the position is that we've got to allow the Secretary to roll out his new framework. It is imperative in this very complex issue that we allow the Secretary to roll out his vision, his plan, his directive, and so no individual views on the bill specifically, but just a reiteration that the Secretary has made toxic exposure a #1 priority, and that is our position today, sir.
And then let me put it this way, because I have a tremendous amount of respect for your team, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for the Secretary. The TEAM Act is supported by 30 organizations who believe this bill can be helpful to veterans, critical care and benefits through the VA, and the veterans need help right now. And we need to move forward with all of these proposals to try to work together. And you need to also remember that the Secretary can have his policies and we can work with him, but we write the law. We write the law. And then we understand where we're coming from and why it is we need to respond now. And I believe that the VA needs to move forward to give comments on all of our bills so that we can try to work together to achieve what is best and as quickly as we can for our veterans. We've drug our feet long enough. Whatever his position will be, and your position will then be, is fine. But remember, it is us through this House and then through the Senate and then signed by the President, what laws will be in place and what you will be doing. That being said, I need to ask Ms. Hastings, if I can, if toxic exposure veterans were allowed to enroll in priority group 6, like the TEAM Act would allow, how many additional enrollees and active users of the VA healthcare system would the VA expect, and how would that impact the Veterans Health Administration, budget, staff, and infrastructure needs?
Ranking Member Boss, that's a very complicated question, as I'm sure you know, and I will take that for record and we will get you a response.
I appreciate that very much. Mr. Kelsey, your VA's testimony stated that Secretary McDonald has directed the department to consider evidence concerning animal toxicology and mechanistic studies, right? Does the NAS consider those studies when completing the report on the health effects of military toxin exposures, such as Agent Orange?
Ranking Member, absolutely. The committee's process is explicit and does include including a search for, and they include in their assessment the toxicologic and mechanistic studies. Absolutely, yes.
All right. Well, Mr. Burke, I got, and I think that probably the answer came a while ago, and you'll probably have to get back with me on this. I would like to, if you could, come back, if you don't know the answer right now, what the VA estimates are on the TEAM Act and the cost that it would affect over the next 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years if it was implemented. So I'm sure you can't do that right now, but as soon as you could, I'd appreciate to get that information back to us as well. So also though, on today's agenda, I know that a lot of these things have a high price tag. The total in some cases is tens of billions of dollars in mandatory money and would require an offset to comply with the pay-go rules. What offset would the administration support to try to pay for some of these things that we're looking forward to try to move forward?
Sir, thank you for that question. That is one certainly I'll take back for the record and get back to you in the committee on, sir.
Okay. Well, my time's running short. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I'm going to call on Representative Slotkin, the chairwoman of the DAMA subcommittee. Representative Luria has agreed to swap places in the question order. So I'm going to permit that to occur in deference to the fact that Ms. Slotkin has to do her question earlier. So Representative Slotkin, you're recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, and thank you, Congresswoman Luria, for swapping with me. I owe you one. I guess the question I have is related to burn pits, and Mr. Burke, I appreciate your discussion of Agent Orange. I appreciate that in your written testimony, you talked about this issue of concession. And we know that on Agent Orange, that it took 29 years to get the first big landmark piece of legislation. And then if you served in the Blue Water Navy and were exposed, it took 57 years for the VA to concede that there was exposure and that might lead to major health ailments. So can you discuss this framework around concession? How would it work? How does it work? How could it work? You at least conceded that folks in Southwest Asia, so Afghanistan, in that theater were exposed. Talk about the framework. How does it work so that we're not waiting another 29 or 57 years?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question, and thank you for the opportunity to explain that. And you are correct. We are we are encouraging veterans to file claims. We are accepting those claims and considering those on a direct basis instead of presumption at this moment. We've given procedural guidance to our claims processors that if the facts and circumstances of the claim show that the veteran served in a location where burn pits were used, we acknowledge or concede that the burn pit, we concede the burn pit exposure and then consider the claims on a direct basis. I should point out that post 9/11 veterans, 2/3 of those veterans had filed claims with us. And so again, if the facts and circumstances reveal that the veteran was in an area where there was known burn pits, we concede exposure. And I'm hoping, ma'am, that answers your question.
And certainly I'm biased here because the bill that I'm suggesting lists the countries for exposure. I would note that in the post 9/11 era, there are a whole bunch of countries, but I wouldn't leave out, for instance, Somalia before 9/11, a few other places where I have, constituents who have watched their platoon leaders die from exposure. So what guidance have you given the VA today, before we have laws, before we have this toxic exposure legislation? What guidance has Secretary McDonough given today to folks on the front lines in our VA centers on the issue of exposure to burn pits?
Ma'am, so the Secretary has made it very clear, and I'm here today to actually emphasize it is important, it is imperative that we encourage veterans to file claims. We are continuing to consider these claims on a direct basis, and the filing of claims also allows us to do one of the 4 pillars of what the Secretary expects, and that is to collect data. And so we need the data from the filing of claims to fit into the framework. So again, if there's a veteran out there that is watching today's hearing or is in contact with you or your office, we would encourage them, please file the claim. They will be considered now. They are being considered on a direct basis. And the data collection, again, is one of the 4 pillars of the charge that the Secretary has given the VA, and we're doing that currently.
Okay, but so there's been some sort of form, I guess the point is, we know that our veterans have felt dissuaded. They have felt like it's not worth the time, especially if they're sick, to go through that claims process because it hasn't been fruitful in the past. So what sick person would ever take the time to fight the red tape of the system if they knew it wasn't going to lead to much? So has there been official documentation, memos, something that the Secretary has sent out so that people on the front lines are not just waiting for someone to just realize that they can now file a claim, but they're actively marketing that to the veterans?
Man, that's a great question, great perspective. And what I can tell you is through the Secretary's testimony, through my testimony now twice, we have committed to getting the word out, encouraging veterans to file. And VA will be increasing its communication to stakeholders, BSOs, and the like, to get the message out. If you have a claim that you believe is a result of exposure to toxins, please file your claim.
Yeah, and I would just say in my remaining time that, you know, in my very short time on the committee, there's so many good things that we have to offer veterans and so little communication to the veterans on what they're eligible for. So I think just expect that sort of the final mile from certainly myself and I think the rest of the committee to push through and make sure we know not just what you're doing to change policy, but the outreach plan to communicate that to the veterans. And with that, I yield back. Thank you, Chairman and Congresswoman Luria.
Thank you, Representative Slotkin. I now call on Mr. Mervan for 5 minutes. Mr. Mervan.
Thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to address this distinct panel. And when we speak to this issue, my question for Mr. Burke is, obviously the stance that you have is against what the current thought process is protecting and advancing veteran issues. That being said, what in conjunction going forward can be done to work with the VA to make sure that the understanding of the passing of the law and the VA-centered issues are at point when it comes to the burn and toxic burns?
Sir, thank you for your question. I can assure you that VA has immense focus on this particular topic. And we've worked, as has been alluded in earlier comments during the hearing today, many of these bills have been worked in collaboration with stakeholders, including us, and we will continue to collaborate with members of Congress and this committee moving forward. But I want to be able to stress the importance that this is not a delay tactic. This is the Secretary's approach to doing a new, revamped, holistic review so that we don't wait the years that we've referenced in the hearing for relief for veterans. And part of his approach is to leverage not only existing partnerships, but to looking to forge new ones. So the collaboration, not only with Congress, but with other stakeholders, is again a key component of what the Secretary expects and what the Secretary has demanded.
And my follow-up is with the passion that our bipartisan committee has on this issue. Just redefine how it could be delayed or not taken action immediately upon what we have talked about.
Sir, I think the main thing to point out here is that this is an extremely complex issue. And that's evidenced by just the 15 bills that we're looking at today. This is not a singular, simple issue to solve. But the Secretary's most important comment to us as an organization is that he has to get this right. And so giving the Secretary an opportunity, leveraging the VA Executive Board, the new principles that he's put in place, it is not one that will get done overnight. However, the Secretary has said it is time to act now. Giving the Secretary the opportunity to collaborate, pull together the framework, and implement a model that actually embodies our ICARE values. He's very serious about committing to this. He wants us to be advocates for veterans. And those ICARE values are the things that he's asking us to build along with this new framework. So there is no interest in taking longer than necessary, but this is very complex. There are a lot of moving pieces, and the Secretary wants to get it right. As does Congress, sir.
Yes. And then my final question would be, ultimately, by getting it right, and the Secretary's philosophy in theoretically examining things and putting his best foot forward, time expires. And as you mentioned, getting it right means veterans who are suffering and not getting benefits for their exposures are at risk. So I urge the Secretary and urge the VA to act accordingly in protecting our veterans.
Yes, sir.
And I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Representative Mervan. I would now call on Representative Sablan for 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome the witnesses and thank them for their testimonies today. Mr. Burke, Secretary Burke, much of the testimony today from the VA source thoughts on the difficulty of catching potential toxic exposure as early as possible. The individual longitudinal exposure record, ILER, is the DoD-VA joint effort to establish a record of service-related toxic exposure. ILER exists as a web-based application and is intended to improve efficiency, effectiveness, and quality of healthcare. The most recent information on the VA website indicates ILER was to be delivered as a pilot program in fall of 2019. So would you kindly explain to me what the current status of ILER is? Please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. For the status on ILER, I'm going to refer to Dr. Hastings from VHA, who's a member of this panel as well. So Dr. Hastings.
Is that Dr. Hastings who was formerly in Hawaii?
Yes, I was formerly in Hawaii and I miss it every day. But that was when I was in the Army, and now I am at the VA. I'm very happy to be serving here. But I am very pleased to tell you, sir, that ILER is in the field. It is being used. We can make copies for the veterans if they need a copy through the Joint Legacy Viewer at this time. I know that there is the desire to have veterans have direct access to it. There are some security issues that will need to be worked out. And that will have to be developed as part of the IT package, but it is available now clinically. We do have at least one person at each VA medical center that has an ILER account. Clinicians can also reach it without an account through the Joint Legacy Viewer. The portion for claims is available, and we are working on the research capability at this time, but very pleased to tell you that it is working, and the feedback we've gotten so far is that it is very appreciated and very helpful.
Yeah, I hope it continues to be that way, but as a follow-up, could ILER be used as an existing data collection system to address the inequities to ensure all veterans get connected to care early before illness progresses?
It is one of those things that can help a clinician start the conversation with a veteran when they come in, because they can look at the places where they have been deployed. We do have excellent education for our clinicians that is available online as an e-learning. It actually is also available on a platform that civilian physicians can use. That will allow them to get, in fact, free continuing medical education credits. And it's very well done. So yes, ILER does let them see where the person has been, where the veteran has served, and also will give them information as to what exposures may have been there. And it can help start the conversation with their veteran.
So yeah, I know the VA does many good things for our veterans, but there are also issues that occur. I hope this ILER continues to be a useful tool for both the providers and for our veterans. So, Chairman Takano, I yield my time back. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Sablan. We now have Representative Miller Meeks on camera, and Representative Miller-Meeks, you recognize for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Chair Takano, Ranking Member Boston, all of our witnesses today. My question comes from a great deal of empathy for both our veterans as a 24-year military veteran in the healthcare sector, as a doctor and a former director of public health. So I know very well the difficulties and challenges of association versus causation. Dr. Kelsey, studies have shown the harmful effects of breathing in fumes from open air burning. However, in the National Academy of Sciences September 2020 report on the health effects of airborne hazard exposure, has only found limited or suggested evidence of and explain why NAS was unable to link specific disabilities with service in Southwest Asia theater of operation.
Representative, if I heard you correctly, first, I wasn't a member of that committee, but I have served on numerous other committees where similar assessments were conducted. And I would say in that instance, the real issue is not all that different from what I said in the opening remark, which is really around quantification of exposure. In an effort to really understand as I'm sure you can appreciate, the dose-response relationship, it does require quantifying exposure. And with respect to burn pits, that's really a very difficult task. The real problem I think that the committee had was assessing individual exposure. And given that that's almost impossible to do, it's also, then it follows, difficult to go beyond limited and suggestive evidence. I think the committee certainly, given better exposure data, could likely do a better job than they did. But I think in their assessment, they were hamstrung by what many of the other committees, the Agent Orange committees and other committees, the Gulf War committees, have been hamstrung by, which is really the poor quality of the exposure data.
Is Ms. Miller-Meeks still with us? I think Ms. Miller-Meeks, Dr. Miller-Meeks has, is she back with us now? There she is.
I apologize, sorry about that. Development of symptoms and the timeliness of exposure.
Dr. Miller-Meeks, could you repeat your question?
Yes, sir, I apologize.
You faded out, but can you repeat your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. Is there also a difficulty with the time period when symptoms are developed and the exposure, or the lag of development of symptoms?
Right, absolutely. That's certainly an additional complication. The timing is absolutely important here, and keeping track of that presents similar difficulty. So I completely agree.
And then if I have remaining time, Mr. Chair, if the VA and the scientific community implemented the recommendations in the September 2020 report, and I realized that you were had limited development, would the VA be in a better position, or we in Congress be in a better position to understand the health effects of burn pits and the airborne hazard exposure?
If that's for me, I'm less familiar with the legislation, so I best not comment on specifics there, except to say that any improvement in exposure assessment, be it when the symptoms occur, when exposure occurs, the time, dose, all of these things are important. And so any improvements that can be legislated are certainly go a long way towards enhancing our understanding of the situation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelsey, and thank you, Chair Takano. I yield my time.
Thank you, Dr. Miller-Meeks. We also appreciate your medical expertise informing the community, the committee's work. The chairwoman of our DAMA subcommittee, Representative Luria, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Takano, and thank you to our witnesses today. I wanted to start, Mr. Burke, by asking you a question about your testimony that you submitted both to the House and Senate. You indicated that the VA would first like the opportunity to improve its internal approach to toxic exposures and needs additional time to do so. I was just curious, what current authorities does the agency have to act on its own to correct these problems? And what, if any, support do you need from Congress in order to accomplish this?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question. In a couple of things, the Secretary, again, has made it very clear that he wants to do an end-to-end review, not just of what we're doing internally, but our partnerships. He wants to leverage not only the partners that we've had historically, but new partners, Congress, of course, being included. And for now, while the Secretary does his end-to-end review, again, I think what we have authority to do now, and we are doing, is to accept and process claims on a direct basis. And we are accepting those claims. So while the Secretary does his improvements or lays out the framework for his improvements, we are continuing to focus on encouraging veterans to file claims, adjudicating those claims on a direct basis, and we have been doing so. In the meantime, the Secretary is working feverishly to stand up the new framework, and I'm sure collaboration with Congress will be a key component of moving forward.
Thank you. And you indicated needing 180 days to complete the review. How quickly after the review is completed can we anticipate seeing action to improve the presumptive process that we've been discussing today?
That I don't know, ma'am, but I will assure you that the Secretary has zero interest in delay. We were given the 180-day framework. I know that the Secretary has committed to updating Congress in other forums and other topics, as this is one of his top priorities. I would imagine that would be the same.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Burke, the Covenant Act, which is my legislation, as well as some of my colleagues' legislation that we also discussed today, included extending Priority Group 6 Veterans Health Administration access to its covered veterans dating back to 1990. At this time, is the VA confident in its ability to welcome an increased number of veterans if we were to expand access to that care? And if not, are there additional resources that would be required from Congress in order to expand care to that larger group of veterans?
Ma'am, if it's fine with you, I'd like to take that one back, consult with VHA and come back with a response.
Okay, well, thank you. And Ms. Murphy, I would love to switch gears a little bit and talk about compensation and pension exams, which we've had an opportunity to talk about in our subcommittee before. And one of the things I'm concerned about is consistency and training for VA and contract examiners in a variety of areas. And do you feel like there's a current continuity in training and performance of these exams across both the VA and contract examiners relative to toxic exposure issues?
Chair Luria, I know that we have had good, rigorous discussion about this under your leadership on the DAMA subcommittee. And yes, I'm assured that there is the same training that VHA is also used for our contract examiners. It's continually refreshed. We have actually split off the Medical Disability Examination Office from Compensation Service just this fiscal year into its own standalone office, so it could have dedicated executive.
I'm sorry, Ms. Murphy, your audio is going in and out. It's very difficult to hear you. I did ask about both the VA and contract examiners, and I believe that you started to answer with a comparison between the two and answering that there is consistency. But is it, I guess maybe my question should be more so, is it sufficient? Is the process sufficient, and are the examiners adequately trained when 78% of these toxic exposure related claims are being rejected?
So yes, ma'am, they are adequately trained and consistently trained. And the report that you challenged us to expand, that burn pit report that only narrowly reports on a small subset, the 14,000, where actually burn pit shows up in the on search words in the claim. We're in the process of expanding that report. We're on target to publish the expanded report beginning next month, and that will show not just the 14,000 that very narrowly have burn pit exposure in their file, but the broader 2.5 million post 9/11 deployed folks, for example, 2/3 of whom have claims, of whom have claimed, filed a claim, and 62% of who are service connected, and the grant rate on those is 94%. And I do apologize for my audio, ma'am.
Oh, thank you. Well, we were able to hear you at the end, and
Okay.
I am very much anticipating seeing the results of this report and working with you to ensure that the most number of veterans possible receive healthcare for conditions related to their service. And so thank you for your work on behalf of the veterans, and look forward to continuing our work together for this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Luria. I now recognize Dr. Ruiz, Representative Dr. Ruiz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, and thank you to all of the witnesses here today. I want to take this down to the basics. My first question is to Mr. Burke. Mr. Burke, would you consistently burn trash, including plastics, human waste, possibly even jet fuel, in your backyard or near your family?
I would not, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Kelsey, doctor to doctor, what potential illnesses could a healthy person develop if they consistently burn trash, as I mentioned, in their backyard?
Dr. Ruiz, that's a complicated question, but there's a panel.
It's not very complicated. You know the answer.
People will get.
What are the illnesses that can potentially be they can develop from breathing in the smoke from burning trash in their backyard?
Well, it depends on the exposure. Certainly, respiratory illness is commonly encountered by inhalation of things that burn.
Right. What else? What other? So respiratory illnesses. What else?
Depending upon what you're burning, you can get systemic illness of all sorts. There's immunotoxic agents that you can inhale. There's you can have digestive ailments. How
about carcinogens?
Of course, absolutely.
Okay, so then asthma, constrictive bronchiolitis, COPD, potential leukemias, pancreatic cancer, brain cancers, all these are potential health consequences of burning trash in your backyard. And with the exposures and dosage, of course, Dr. Kelsey, that you had mentioned. So burning household waste produces many toxic chemicals and is one of the largest known sources of dioxins in the nation. Dioxin is a carcinogen. A carcinogen causes cancer. Cancer causes deaths, right? It's a pretty straightforward association. In fact, according to the EPA, burning waste is a serious public health threat. The EPA banned it in the US in 1979. It is bad for people here. It is bad for our military personnel serving our countries overseas. We need to end the exposure to burn pits in our military, and we need to act now to care for our veterans who are coming back with delayed injuries in the form of asthma, constrictive bronchiolitis, COPD, and cancers. Too many have been told by the VA that their injuries are not service-related, even though there is enough suspicion, enough evidence to show a high enough association correlation of the illness due to exposure to toxic chemicals from burn pits. We cannot sit by and watch our veterans wait decades like they were forced to with Agent Orange, which is why I will not stop fighting. We should not stop fighting until our veterans get presumption of service connection for their exposure to toxic substances during their service. Look, you have mentioned, Dr. Kelsey, that producing causality of an agent to an illness is very tough standards. Of course, they're tough standards. The best ideal way of benchmark research is to put a person and expose them to the agent, right? And then you can control the amount of dose that they get. Well, that's illegal because it's unethical. And you said it yourself that it is almost impossible to determine. So let's not use that as the strict criteria. We need to expand our models of association and correlation to show a high enough suspicion of an agent that causes a severe enough consequence, which is death. We have already correlation studies from firefighters exposed to the toxic smoke of jet fuels crashing into the buildings that caused cancers and respiratory illnesses. We already have dioxin that have been found in the sample and the sand in places where burn pits were used. And we have bronchoscopic biopsy samples that show metals in the lungs of veterans exposed to burn pits. So there is evidence to show a high enough suspicion, association, correlation to know that our burn pits exposed veterans are dying of cancers, being permanently disabled of respiratory illnesses. This question, last question, is for Mr. Burke. Does the VA support establishing presumption of service connections to veterans exposed to burn pits or other toxic substances?
Sir, as contained in the written testimony, my oral statement, the Secretary is committing to doing an end-to-end review of the current process.
All right, so then it sounds
right.
like we're gonna have to do it for you. It sounds like this committee is gonna have to write the legislation and do it for you, because we can't wait for a repeat VA performance the way they did for the veterans exposed to Agent Orange. We will not allow that to happen to our veterans in this generation. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. I now call on Representative Rosendale, who is the ranking member of our Tech Modernization Subcommittee. Representative Rosendale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I've been juggling between two committees, so if anything I request here is replication, I apologize right up front. I'd like to start off with Dr. Hastings. Could you please detail the VA's ongoing research into the potential health effects of deployment to K2 Air Base?
Absolutely. As you know, we are working with the Agency for Toxic Substance Disease Registry and with DOD very closely. We do have the interagency agreement completed with the Agency for Toxic Substance Disease Registry, and we are sharing information with DOD for their own mortality study because we have two separate studies, as you know. We have a unique approach with the K2 group with ATSDR. It is not going to be a one and done. It is going to be an ongoing surveillance, which will go at least 20 years into the future and possibly longer, sir.
Okay, and going on, Dr. Hastings, is every veteran patient who seeks care in the VA healthcare system asked about potential toxic exposures? And why or why not?
I do not know if every single person is asked that, but it is an important component of a history. And veterans come to VA because VA is uniquely situated to know about what they've been exposed to, what they've had happen to them during their service. And this may be an injury, it may be post-traumatic stress, it may be many other things that VA is frankly better at than just about anyone else. So I do not know that every single person is asked that, but I believe that it would be part and parcel of a history done by a VA physician, nurse practitioner, or PA. And we do have an environmental health coordinator at each VA medical center to help the veterans to get in for a specific exam for an exposure assessment or a registry exam.
So do we have in the record system the ability to identify immediately where a veteran has been conducting their service, so that and have those areas already targeted where they may have been exposed, so that we can sort of flag it on their file?
Sir, we do have service cohorts and we do have some identifiers, but what is coming now is EILER, which will do exactly that. We will know where they were, and that will be if it's a garrison exposure, such as our concerns with the Camp Lejeunes, the PFAS and other things, but it's also their deployments to war zones, to other deployments in sub-Saharan Africa, Somalia, the Philippines, whatever. But that will let us know exactly where they have been, what years, and we do have an application that I will be very happy to send information about called Exposure Ed, which was put together by VA's toxicologists that can let veterans or care providers or civilian physicians, it can be on an iPhone or an Android, and it lets them look at a specific time period. It lets them look at a specific exposure or a specific cohort to give them up-to-date information on exposures.